So the Elite Spec beta has been going on, and I took out this opportunity to try out the Evoker, the new elite specialization for the Elementalist. And honestly, I'm a pretty big fan. The Evoker has a lot of different movesets that really make for fun gameplay, and this is my thoughts on it. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more Guild Wars 2 content. As a disclaimer, I focus mainly on structured PvP and open world PvE for the testing, as those are really where I spend most of my time in this game anyway. So the Evoker has a different playstyle than the other Elementalist spec. The Evoker focuses heavily on the use of the familiar. As the familiar builds up skill charges, basically use any skill and that grants you a familiar charge, you can then use a familiar ability. After 3 uses of your familiar ability, you will get the use of an empowered version of that skill. This honestly felt awesome, as it felt like there was an extra ability for us to utilize like on a very short cooldown. The main focus I found was even trying it out at the Lion's Arch Aerodome and have nothing but a fire staff build, and I was spamming the familiar ability like non-stop. It was up every other second. Now, before you enter into combat, you choose which familiar you want to utilize. Any of the 4 elements, really, and honestly, they each had their own good flavor. I specifically like the Lightning Hair familiar. The downside of that is because the Lightning Hair familiar has a bit of a ground targeting reticle that you have to hit, but again, that's not a terrible thing. In PvP, it becomes tricky, but PvE is usually no problem. I also really liked the trait lines for the Evoker. It seemed very polarized as either support or DPS, which again is kind of the Elementalist way of doing things anyway, but the use of the familiar ability can grant up to like 25% extra damage or condi damage permanently, and it's like, that's wild. It's up all the damn time. I tested out the main weapons that I like to use, which is the staff, the double dagger, or the spear, and they all seem to flow pretty nicely. And it packed a pretty good punch, honestly. I do like the idea of being able to dance between familiar charges and usage, and I also tried to find myself not wasting any of the familiar charges, because you can store said familiar ability without using it, and then you can use skills to build up another familiar charge. However, you will hit a cap if you're not using them. I really did feel like the Evoker hits well with what the Elementalist already does and doesn't kind of overcomplicate any of the Elementalist abilities any more than what it needs to be. Like if we're comparing against like the Weaver or perhaps even the Catalyst. Really well done on that regard. Now, there was only a couple things I really didn't agree with. I wouldn't say I disliked, I just didn't agree as far as the Evoker is concerned. The major item is the idea of the Grandmaster trait that locks the Elementalist into the chosen attunement based off of the familiar that they're using. Yes, the trade-off is that you can cast those abilities faster and grant 2 familiar charges each time you use the skill. The problem I found is that it loses all the versatility that makes the Elementalist unique. For example, I think that being locked into 1 attunement in open world is a bad idea. If, say, for example, you were a fire mage build, focusing heavily on burning damage, you lose a lot of healing and condition cleanse that you would have gotten from water attunement, or perhaps barrier and protection uptime from earth attunement, or even crowd control from air attunement. Granted, this probably would very much excel in raids or strikes where there are more defined roles and other people are focusing on healing you and cleansing conditions, of course. So then that way you can focus purely on DPS or even purely healing. And honestly, the healing support that you could do, as if you picked up the Familiar's Blessing trait, where you have a healing familiar, the Otter, and you can remove conditions while also granting alacrity. I mean, I think that's going to be really good for any kind of like support Evoker. It's going to be fantastic. So it certainly does have its uses, and of course in those niche conditions. But I would say PvP, World v World, open world, that's not going to fly. It's not going to do very well unless you have like extra people who are there to support you. I would also reiterate that I'm not much of a support. I'm actually quite terrible at it, but I would imagine if you played the Evoker correctly, it would be fantastic as a heal support or a heal boon support choice, as it has a ton of options to make all that happen. I'm just calling that now. Watch out, you Tempests. So after playing the Evoker, I for one am excited to see how it pans out. I've thoroughly enjoyed the playstyle of doing lots of charges and familiar damage. I'm not a 100% fan of the specialized elements, as it feels like you're locking yourself out of fantastic utility that the Elementalist offers by dancing through the elements. However, I will say that I can see the direction that they are going, and it could be very, very good, especially in grouped settings like raids or strikes where everything's a little bit more contained. This, in my mind, would honestly, this specialized element Grandmaster trait would honestly replace a lot of the low intensity builds as far as I'm concerned. I tried the Fire Evoker against the training dummy, and it was basically just press all the buttons as they're off cooldown. Everything burns. I'm getting like ticking damage of like 20,000. Like, it's crazy. You don't have to worry about attunement swapping, so perhaps specialized elements could be a way for new players to try the Elementalist and learn the playstyle without feeling like they're being thrown into the wolves and having to learn everything about the Elementalist and dancing between attunements. Maybe that's something that could be very helpful. Personally, I loved the PvP for the Evoker. I'm an avid double dagger catalyst currently for PvP, and I'm having a great time with it. The Evoker seems to add that little bit of extra spike damage to really make it stick. Now, having said that, I do trade off the durability of the catalyst for the damage for the Evoker, but all in all, it's been pretty great. And again, for the most part, if you're playing as an Elementalist, it's glass cannon anyway. I've even been trying to use the spear more often to see if it makes the Evoker playstyle a little bit better, and then it's only all right. I mean, the spear has some issues in PvP currently. It's not as, we'll say, flexible, especially if you get jumped by a lot of melee users. But honestly, I think with the Evoker, you could probably figure something out. It's like a ranged glass cannon, maybe. Something I gotta test more. The damage scaling for the Evoker also never felt like it was overpowered. I've heard like the Amalgam is like pumping crazy numbers, so I don't know what's going on over there, but the Evoker felt like it was kind of like in the correct ballpark in both open world and PvP terms. Even when I focused purely on damage, I didn't feel like I was doing immensely better or worse than any of my current builds or really any of the other abilities that I have. I even went ahead and started trying one of the Snowcrow builds to see how it can be played at maximum potential, and honestly, I was doing a crap ton of damage. The rotation using a scepter and dagger and persisting flames really made it quite fast, and the balance of using the Bloodstone Relic made it even harder. The trick with the Bloodstone Relic is to get 4 blast finishers within a single timeline of a fire field from the dagger offhand, which makes it for the rotation to be incredibly tight. I'm certainly not on the level of Snowcrows guys, just because, I mean, I could get up to like 35,000 on my best pull, where these guys are pulling like damn near 55, 60,000 on their pulls. I mean, it's incredible. Personally, this makes me feel better about my pure Condi damage fire elementalist because, well, it's a hell of a lot less buttons to press, and hey, it was pretty cool to see that I had nothing but Condi damage and burning everything alive, like 23, 30,000 damage ticks. It was fun. Maybe 30,000 is a little high. I will say I did enjoy seeing what the DPS rotations could be done for the Evoker at the maximum capacity. But, I mean, all in all, what I'm expecting is that the Evoker is going to be a solid choice, and even may replace my current open world PvE build, which I'm currently running a Spear Tempest, and I'm thinking Spear Evoker might just hit just right. I don't know. I like the Lightning Spear idea. First, I feel like Zeus, you know? Not the PvP or the God of Thunder. So that's my thoughts on the Evoker during this beta. As for the next expansion, you should be getting ready for it. You should be getting ready for Visions of Eternity. And if you want to see what I am doing, you can click this video here. As always, stay caffeinated, folks.